Thanks, Travis, for the introduction. Again, my name is Pat Haage. I'm with Flood and Peterson Insurance, and as Travis said, I'm a certified safety professional. I don't like this first slide to confuse anybody because CSP does not stand for Colorado State Patrol, so I'm not law enforcement. Um, if you have questions throughout about the law and that type of thing, I can certainly do my best to answer some of that, but that is not my area of expertise. We'll be talking about safety and whatnot as we go through. So. The first thing I'd like to ask the group is, typically when I do this in front of a live crowd, I will just ask what this number represents, what you think this number represents. You can throw it in the chat if you want to, but I think in the interest of time, we'll just kind of move through this. But basically, this is the average number of people in the United States that die every year as the result of the use of motor vehicles. And this is a very difficult number to get your arms around. And some years it's a little lower, some years it's a little bit higher, but on average, this is where we are. And when you try to get your arms wrapped around a number that's this large, I think the best way to do this is to think of going to Coors Field. And if you're going to see, the Rockies play, a big team like the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Cardinals, somebody like that, generally you see that stadium is pretty full. Well, this number, represents a stadium full of people. You look around to your side, in front of you, to the people that are across the aisle from you, all the way across the stadium in the opposing stands. This is the number that dies every single year. And one thing that surprises me, I think, a little bit about this is that if 1/10 of this number died every year in commercial airline crashes, there would be an absolute uproar. But here we are, year after year, we're losing this many people, and so it is the number one killer of American workers is driving. So you think of all the dangerous occupations that are out there. Boy, it pale in comparison to something that most of us do on a daily basis, and that is drive our motor vehicles. So I'm going to go on here to this next slide and kind of explain a little bit about what we're talking about here as far as pre-driving practices, and there are three elements of safe driving that are absolutely under your control. And I know that when we talk about defensive driving, you encounter things out on the road, you encounter other drivers, and there's nothing you can do to affect the behavior of somebody else that's on the road. But what you can do, and there are certain things that you can do to increase your potential of getting from point A to point B safely. And these are outlined on this slide. Number one is driver readiness. Are you personally ready to operate a motor vehicle? Are you tired? Are you under the influence of alcohol? Are you under the influence of drugs, whether it's prescription medication or otherwise? You need to make sure that you are physically ready to operate that motor vehicle. Vehicle condition is another one. That's in your control. Are your brakes functional? Do you have good tires? Are your windshield wipers functional? Do you have enough wiper fluid in the reservoir? Getting ready for trips, if it's going to be snowing and raining and that type of thing. That's on you. And even if you operate company vehicles as part of your job, it's still your responsibility to make sure that that vehicle is roadworthy. Whether you're doing a pre or post-trip inspection or, just checking things out before you get on the road, that's your responsibility to make sure that that vehicle is in good shape, good enough to be on the road safely. And the last one here is driver attitude. Did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Did you have an argument with your significant other? Are you just in a bad mood? Well, a lot of times that attitude carries itself into your driving behavior, and it can be very, very dangerous. So again, that's something that's under your control. Make sure that you're going into your drive in a positive attitude so that you're not taking it out on other drivers or attempting to drive aggressively and that sort of thing. So one of the things that I want to mention about this presentation is that a lot of this is based on the National Safety Council's defensive driving course. Some of you in attendance today may have taken that before, but this you'll see a lot of my defenses and the things that we talk about today are based on that course. And the National Safety Council defines defensive driving as driving to save lives, time, and money in spite of the conditions around you or the actions of others. Now, one of the things that the the National Safety Council is big on is this whole idea of a preventable accident. And they define a preventable accident as an accident in which the drivers did not do everything reasonable to avoid a collision. So when you think about this, if you've ever been in an accident or you know someone who's been in an accident, whether that's a family member, it's a coworker, it's a friend, outside of, once you've determined that there've been no injuries, that everybody's okay, what are some of the questions that you typically ask? And when I ask my groups when I present this, I get a lot of things thrown out there. Were you wearing your seatbelt? Were drugs and alcohol involved? Were any other injuries involved? What happened? What were the circumstances? Ultimately, this comes around to the question of whose fault it was. And I want to tell you, everybody, that as defensive drivers, we want to throw fault kind of out the window right now. Fault is only important for the police so they can determine who's going to get the ticket. And it's important for the insurance carriers, assuming everybody's insured, as to who's going to pay for the loss. But what we're trying to accomplish as defensive drivers is preventability. We want to prevent the collision from happening, regardless of who has the right of way or who technically was at fault. One way to illustrate this is through blind spots. I would imagine that most everyone on the call here understands what a blind spot is. If you don't, and just look at the image here and you can kind of get a feel for this. The example here, you're driving at a highway speed. Let's just say that you're driving the white van that's in the lane closest to us in the picture. And you see in the center lane, you've got your cruise control set. You don't want to go any faster because maybe you've got it set at the speed limit. You're in that lane legally, and you see that you're just barely overtaking this red car that's in the center lane. And you see up ahead of that red car in that center lane is a slower moving truck. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that you're not going to finish your pass before that red car is either going to need to slow down or is going to want to move into a lane to pass that truck. But again, you figure, hey, I'm here legally. I was here first. I've got my cruise on. And maybe in your mind, you just think, I'm going to make this red car driver just slow down and wait for me to pass. Well, the problem is you're in that red car driver's blind spot. And let's just assume for the sake of this example that the red car doesn't have blind spot monitoring on it. That driver fails to look around over their shoulder to see that you're there. They move into your lane and they strike your vehicle. Now, there's no injuries with this. You all pull over at the side of the road and you wait for the police to show up. Now, typically when I'll ask the audience, who is at fault in a situation like that. And when I say that, in most jurisdictions, in most cases, since the white van that you're driving was there first, you're there legally, the red car moved into your lane and struck your vehicle, the red car is technically at fault. But was this crash preventable on your part as the driver of the white van? And I would advocate that yes, it was, because as a defensive driver, one of the things we want to do is be able to anticipate the actions of others. We use our driving experience on the road to be able to tell, hey, what do I think this driver is going to do? In this case, it's pretty simple. We could see the slow moving vehicle that was up in the middle lane. We knew that red car was likely going to come over. We've been in that person's blind spot, so there's a chance they don't know that we're there or don't realize that we're there. So our defense would have either been to speed up to get in next to that person so they could see us, or slow down until we wait and see what that person is actually going to do. That's the whole idea of preventability, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit more with another example in a second. So benefits of defensive driving, there are many. Saving your life and the lives of others in your vehicle, reducing traffic crash-related injuries, saving time, saving money, reducing your chance of being involved in a crash, and reducing your chance of getting a traffic ticket. Now, we're all motivated by different things, and I get that. But I'm guessing that most of us, if not all of us, are motivated by at least one of the reasons on this slide. Now, I will tell you, I've got a couple of videos, and Brittany alluded to these in her introduction. There's a couple videos in this presentation. I am not going to show you anything that's bloody or gory, but there are a couple videos that are graphic, and this is one of them. I'm about to show you an intersection crash. I'm going to show this a couple of times, but what I want you to focus on are a couple of questions. And number one, was this accident preventable that we're about to see? And number two, which of the drivers involved in this could have prevented it? All right, so traffic is coming to a stop. PT Cruiser enters the intersection and strikes the SUV. Now I'm going to show it again. Again, the first question, if you want to throw this in the chat, that's okay. Brittany, maybe you can monitor this for me. But number one question is, was it preventable? And number two, which of these drivers do you think could have prevented this crash? Let's show it again. PT Cruiser enters, broadsides the SUV, and you see what happens there. Brittany, do we have any comments? Anybody want to venture? What do you think about this? Was it preventable, first off? Hopefully, most people are saying yes.
Don't have any chats quite yet, Pat.
Okay, that's all right. We'll give people a chance to respond if they want to. Um, Most of the time I get some, the groups that I present this to will uniformly say, yes, this was preventable. Where we start the discussion is when I ask whether or not, which of these drivers could have prevented the crash. And oftentimes I get comments back from people saying, well, it was the PT Cruiser, because the traffic that was, up above there was coming to a stop. So PT Cruiser should have stopped and the other car had the right of way. And we argue about lights and all that. But at the end of the day, did you get some comments, Brittany, on that?
I sure did. One person said it looks like the P2 Cruiser should have slowed down for a possible yellow light.
Okay.
Uh, Another person said yes, preventable. There was also a comment of more than likely yes, especially at an intersection where there are functioning stoplights. And then there's another person that said looks like the PT Cruiser is at fault, but both drivers should have prevented this.
Okay.
So
I
yeah.
love it. I'm going to thank you for saying that. And that's a great place to stop because that's exactly where I'm going with this. So oftentimes, folks, when we talk about this and we even use the word fault in one of the responses, I didn't ask whose fault it was, right? My question was, was it preventable? And the answer that the person gave on the last one, that both drivers, that's what I'm looking for. When we start arguing about who had the right of way, we're really talking about fault. And so again, as defensive drivers, the focus is preventability, even if you may have the right of way. So in this case, and I realize that it's a very limited view that we have, I'm going to advocate that both of those drivers had some culpability with this and that it could have been prevented by both of those drivers had they been paying attention to what was going on when they came into this intersection. I mean, think about it, folks. I mean, we drive through intersections like this on a daily basis. Four lanes, turn lanes. It's regulated by street lights. This is a very, very dangerous, statistically speaking, a very, very dangerous place to operate a motor vehicle. And we encounter these on a regular basis. So what I would advocate is even if you have the right of way, the green light, just make sure that you're looking all around, take in the whole picture, and you can take your foot off the accelerator, cover the brake. Not advocating that you actually slow down unless you want to, but you don't want to create a hazard either. But just be ready for anything. I want to show this one last time, and I want you to pay attention to the pedestrian that's over on the left-hand side of the screen. I want you to tell me when this person realizes they're in trouble. Okay, and the fact of the matter is that person did not realize they were in trouble until after the vehicles struck one another in the intersection. So I know this breaks away from defensive driving for a moment, but we are all going to be pedestrians at some point. Many of us were pedestrians already this morning. We will be at the end of the day when we leave, whether we're going to pick up kids from school or we're going to the grocery store, whatever the case may be. If you're walking across a street, across a parking lot, please make sure that you keep your head up and look around and be aware of your surroundings so that you can potentially avoid a dangerous situation like this. All right, that's preventability. How fast do you have to be going to do something like this? Or this? Or this? Do you see the guardrail? This picture was taken from a series of photographs. I think you can clearly see the result of this. The car hit the tree and split into two pieces. There was a series of photographs with this, and one showed the speedometer of this vehicle frozen at 85 miles an hour. Car versus tree, the tree is going to win the vast majority of the time. Car versus telephone pole does not fare much better. Do you see the motorcycle in this picture? This was oftentimes when I show this picture to groups, they mistake the wheel that's in the middle of the car basically as a spare tire. That's the motorcycle's rear wheel. This was put on display at a European motorcycle show to encourage riders to be safe. I think you can clearly see the result of this. The red car pulled out into traffic, thinking that the motorcyclist was far enough away, but the motorcyclist was traveling at such a high rate of speed that the collision happened. This was a triple fatality. I'm going to talk a little bit more about motorcycles here in a moment. So driver safety awareness tips, okay? As I mentioned before, take in the whole picture. Try not to get too mesmerized by just the vehicle that's right in front of you because there's so much more going on around you. You've got to keep in mind and be aware of everything that's going on all around your vehicle. Scan the road ahead of you, 10 to 12 seconds down the road, to the next curve in the road, to the next intersection. It's so important that you do that so you can anticipate the things that are going to happen ahead of you. Check your mirrors frequently again so that you know what's going on around your vehicle. Try to anticipate the actions of others. I know I mentioned this before, and sometimes this seems maybe a little pie in the sky, like it's easier said than done. But honestly, when you think about it, you see a lot of things on the road that I know you're left scratching your head. I know I am. I'll see things that I look at it and I say, I didn't see that coming. I had no idea that person was going to do that. But the converse of that, as much as I'm out on the road, and I'm sure as much as a lot of you are out on the road, you see things that you think, yeah, I saw that coming. I knew they were going to do that. And you base that on your experience, right? You see what they're doing because you recognize the signs, whether they're speeding up and slowing down, they're swerving through traffic, they're hard braking, they're just doing all the things that we know are indicative of an aggressive driver, whether they're in a hurry or that's just their normal operating mode. But you use that to make you a better defensive driver, anticipating the actions of others so that you can be ready for anything that you encounter. Don't travel in the left lane unless it's absolutely necessary. The left lane is normally reserved for passing, right? So try to stay out of that left lane. If you're on the highway and you're a posted speed limit of 65 or higher, in Colorado, it's against the law to camp out in the left lane. If we have time in a little while, we'll talk about, road rage and aggressive driving and that sort of thing. But, it's very important that we leave that left lane open for passers. And plus, we never know what's going to come across the road from the other side. And I've got an example of that coming up here in a few minutes as well. Don't travel in someone's blind spot. We already talked about the importance of that. And last but not least, maintain proper following distance, which is a great segue to the next slide. So how do you avoid getting into a rear end collision? The basic rule here is that you need to increase your following distance. That's not rocket science, folks. If you want to prevent yourself from running into the person in front of you, you've got to maintain a safe distance. Consider this. At 65 miles an hour under good conditions, the distance needed to stop your vehicle is about 300 feet or the length of a football field. Now, that's under good conditions, okay? That means the road is dry, there's no debris on the road, your brakes are working, your tires have good tread, and your reaction time is good. It still takes 300 feet to stop a standard vehicle, pickup or SUV going 65 miles an hour. So how do you calculate following distance? There are different formulas out there. I will tell you that way back when I went through driver's education back in high school, we were taught that the way you calculated following distance is you put one vehicle length between your vehicle and the vehicle that you're following for every 10 miles an hour that you're traveling. So if you're going 40 miles an hour, ideally you would have 4 vehicle lengths between you and the vehicle that's in front of you. And that's all well and good. There's nothing wrong with that. I know there are a lot of folks that still use that formula. The only issue with that is that everyone's idea of a car length might be a little bit different. And it does get a little more difficult to determine that distance when you're up at highway speeds. So what the National Safety Council came up with is something called the 3-second rule. Many of you may be familiar with this. The way this works is that as you're following a vehicle out on the road, and it doesn't matter if you could be on the highway, you could be on a city street, it doesn't matter. This applies. As you watch the vehicle that you're following pass a fixed object on the road, and that fixed object could be anything. Could be a sign, it could be a tree, it could be a rock or a parked car. After that vehicle passes that fixed object, you start counting to yourself 1001, 1002, 1003. If your vehicle has passed that fixed object before you're done counting, then the chances are pretty good that you're following too close. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here, a couple things actually, you'll want to add at least an additional second of following distance if the conditions are poor. And I'll tell you, when we start getting these wet, snowstorms and things are coming up, I could advocate adding, 4, 5, 6 different additional seconds if necessary, just to maintain that safe space. If you're towing a trailer, you need to add an additional second at least. Why is that? Well, the trailer adds weight to your entire rig. And so it's going to take you longer to slow down. And then this last one here, if you're behind a motorcycle, it's so important that you increase your following distance between you and the motorcycle because motorcycles can literally stop on a dime. They are much, much lighter than any, four-wheel vehicle that's out there on the road. And so, if you're in some of us, may have been in situations where close calls or otherwise, where a motorcyclist, slowed down significantly when we were following them. And you know what I'm talking about. You can catch up to them very, very quickly. You know, we talk about low speed impact, 20 miles an hour or less from one vehicle to another vehicle. Generally, we're not looking at major injuries. That typically people will walk away from those without any injuries. I know there are exceptions. I get that. But most of the time, people will walk away. If you're talking a low speed impact, between a vehicle and a motorcycle, you could easily be looking at a fatality. So just keep that in mind. We still got some, pretty warm weather that we're dealing with out here in Colorado. And, we're still seeing a lot of motorcyclists on the road. So keep that in mind as you go through. Okay, so what's enough space? And where am I going with this? When you're passing someone, how do you know when it's safe to pull in front of the vehicle that you're passing? Now, typically, when I ask this question to the groups when we're doing an in-person presentation, I'll get a variety of answers. A lot of times people say, well, when I can see the other vehicle's headlights in my rearview mirror, or when I can see their bumper in my rearview mirror, or their license plate. And I'm going to go a step further beyond that. So the general rule is this. When you can see in your rearview mirror the pavement under the front wheels of the vehicle that you're passing. Now, how about this? When you're coming to a stop, how much space should you allow between your vehicle and the vehicle in front of you? We're going to use that same theory here, enough space to see the pavement below the other vehicle's tires. Now, there's a reason we talk about both of these things. Number one, when you're passing, I think it's fairly obvious that's dangerous, right? The vehicles are in motion. And so we just spent a considerable amount of time talking about the importance of following distance. We want to make sure that as we pass people that we're respectful of that following distance that they're going to have for us. I don't like to be tailgated. I don't know about everybody else that's on this, so I don't want to cut people off and have them right behind me. I want to make sure I've given them enough space. Now, when we go to the point where we're stopped, oftentimes I ask people, why is that important? I mean, it's clear that when we're moving, when we're passing someone, there's an element, a pretty significant element of danger with something like that. But when we're stopped, what's the big deal? I can think of 4 good reasons why you want to maintain that proper following distance or that space between you and the vehicle that's stopped in front of you. Number one is if you are rear-ended and you're super close to the vehicle that's in front of you, this could become a domino effect that they push you into the vehicle in front of you. Now you've got additional damage, and you're in a situation where if witnesses don't corroborate your story, if you were just sitting there at a stoplight, you get rear-ended and pushed into the vehicle in front of you, that should be, and I'm going to use the word, I know I told you I wasn't going to, but I'm going to use the word fault. That should not be your fault. You should not be responsible for anything on that, right? The problem is that if the witnesses don't all know what happened, and if you've been in a wreck and you know how confusing things can be because things happen in a snap of a finger, you may be in a situation where you can't prove that you were the one that was hit and pushed into the vehicle in front of you. And I've heard of cases, people have actually told me this in my classes before, where they were involved in that type of situation, and the police officer just basically gave a ticket to every single person that struck another vehicle. That was the only way that they could work it out. So maintain your space for that reason. Another one is, what if the vehicle in front of you stalls out? There's nothing you can do. You're stuck at that point. And so, you want to make sure that you've maintained enough space so that you can safely pull out and around that vehicle when the time comes. Another reason is, potentially being behind somebody with a manual transmission, especially if you're on an incline or on a hill. A lot of times when they go from the clutch, they let out the clutch and go from the brake to the accelerator, they're going to roll back just a little bit. And I would tell you that even, vehicles that are on a steep hill, if they're automatic transmission, oftentimes they will roll back, especially if it's a big truck, especially if it's a big truck that's loaded down. So just keep in mind that when you pull up behind people, especially on a hill, maintaining that distance is very important. And the last reason that I like to mention here, we don't hear about this as much, but it does happen. You want to make sure that you've got enough space to drive out of a situation if someone tries to get into your car that you don't want in your car. Whether they're trying to carjack you or they're trying to grab that laptop bag on your seat or your purse or whatever the case may be. So always a good reason, to maintain that proper distance between yourself and the vehicle in front of you when you're stopped and making sure that you maintain that proper space as you pass people. Okay, let's keep going. Very quickly, talking about proper backing. Okay, I know it's, oftentimes I wonder, why are we talking about this? What is the big deal? Well, the issue here is that less than 1% of a driver's time is spent backing their vehicle on average. A lot of times when I ask people that, they say, oh, 10% or, 5% or whatever. It shocks people sometimes to know that it's a very, very small percentage of our time is spent backing the vehicle. However, a full 25% of claims in insurance involve backing incidents. So that's why I like to talk about it. So the defense is this: observe the backing area as you approach. Okay, it's a whole lot easier to look for potential hazards when you're looking through your windshield or your windows on either side than blasting past it and then relying on your rear view mirrors, your side view mirrors, or a backup camera for that matter to get back into a spot. Check your top clearances, check your side clearances, and before reversing your vehicle, make sure to check your mirrors, check your blind spots, always important there. And most importantly, here is to proceed slowly. There's no reason to be hell bent for leather when you're backing into a spot. I would advocate that you made a bad choice as far as the timing of that if you have to hurry that much to get backed into a spot. Continue to check your mirrors until you've reached your final position. Okay. So, one of the best things that I like to throw out to people here is just understanding that when you go to park your vehicle, what is the best way to avoid a backing accident? And that is to not back up. So when you pull into a parking spot, if you can pull straight forward so that when you leave, you're pulling forward and not having to back out, that's ideal. That's perfect. So give that a try. Okay. Seatbelts. I know that a lot of times people wonder why we still cover this because, I don't know if you've looked at or heard any of the recent statistics. I think Colorado is now up to 90% seatbelt usage rate in the state. National average, I believe, is 91% because some of that has to do with primary and secondary seatbelt laws and that type of thing. So when you think about it, it's like, well, 90%, wow, that's an A minus. That's pretty good. I know when I was in school, I'd do anything for an A minus. But I'm going to, be the safety geek here and just kind of get on my soapbox a little bit. That means that a full 10% of the drivers that are on the road at any given time are not wearing their seatbelt. And how many decades of data do we have showing that seatbelts it really help us survive crashes, right? Yet we still have a lot of people out there that are not wearing these things. As a safety professional, I don't think I'm going to be satisfied until I see that number up in the 95 plus range. I mean, you're always going to get that small percentage of people that say, well, if the government tells me I got to do it, I'm not doing it. I can't argue with that. That's an issue that's beyond my capability. But, the bottom line is I think once we can get 95% plus, we'll be in good shape. So seatbelts keep you inside your vehicle, and by staying inside your vehicle, your chances of surviving a crash are 25 times greater than if you were thrown out. They reduce serious and fatal injuries by 60%, and they enhance your chances of survival. So let's do a couple of myths. Myth number one, you really only need seat belts for long trips or high-speed driving, and that's false. Okay, at least 75% of all deaths and serious injuries occur less than 25 miles from home at speeds under 40 miles an hour. How about this one? In a crash, I can brace myself with my hands and my arms. Yeah, only if you have superhuman strength. In a frontal collision, an occupant weighing 165 pounds moving at 30 miles an hour would impact the windshield or instrument panel with roughly 2.5 tons of force, which is far more than most people's bones, muscles, and tissue can handle. So we talked about motivation earlier on in this presentation, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is a picture of my motivation for wearing a seatbelt. I do not want to eat glass. So when I was growing up, I grew up in Colorado Springs. I went to a high school that was located up on a hill. And if you think back to your high school days and getting out for Christmas break, winter break, whatever it was that you called it at the time, you're getting out for 2 weeks. You're pretty stoked, right? Well, this was our case. We were getting out for Christmas break and everybody was excited. But on this particular day, it had been snowing significantly. So the bell rang, we all ran out to our cars or started to make our way home. One of our classmates jumped into his car, did not put his seatbelt on. He took off. He was in a hurry. He sped down the hill. He lost control on the snow and he hit a tree at the base of the hill. He hit that tree so hard that his head punched through the windshield of his car. Now, I didn't know this kid. He was one grade ahead of me. But I will tell you this, that the scars that that kid had on his face for the remaining years that I went to school with him were so horrific that to this day, I can see those scars. I can see that kid's face as clearly as I can see anything on my desktop here. If we were all in person, I would tell you that I can see him as clearly as I could see all the faces in the room. That is my motivation. That's why I wear my seatbelt is I do not want to eat glass. Now, here's an example. You see this picture, and that's a fairly significant amount of front end damage, but compare it to this one. Similar amounts of damage, right? But that's a clear windshield. How about this one? That's a pretty significant amount of front end damage, but the person driving this car was wearing her seatbelt, and you can see she did not hit the windshield. The windshield is clear. Typically, when I show this picture, I ask the crowd, the group, what they see, just what stands out to you. And typically, the first thing is the shattered windshield and knowing that someone in this car hit that windshield with their head, whether it was a front seat occupant or a rear seat occupant, they were unrestrained. The other thing you see here is airbags. And if you're lucky enough to be operating a motor vehicle with airbags, just keep in mind that airbags are designed to be used in conjunction with a seatbelt. A lot of times cars will have embossed on either the steering wheel or on the dashboard in front of the passenger, SRS, the letters SRS. It stands for Supplemental Restraint System. Supplemental means secondary, right? In addition to. Those are secondary to your seatbelt. Your seatbelt is your primary form of protection in an automobile or a car or truck, in a motor vehicle of any kind, and will be for the foreseeable future until they, devise something that is safer than that. Airbags are great, don't get me wrong, and we're lucky to have them, but we need to be respectful of them too because they can cause some very serious injuries if we're not restrained first off by the seatbelt. Okay, another one. In a crash, the seatbelt can cause as much injury as you would suffer without one. Now, studies show that the seatbelt may indeed cause some injuries to the shoulder, chest, or pelvis. However, these injuries are far less severe than those incurred by an unrestrained occupant. Okay, last one. In a crash, you'd be better off without a seatbelt because you could be thrown free of the vehicle. I have actually had a person in one of my classes you tell me that that was their reason for not wearing a seatbelt. They actually thought that by getting thrown out of the vehicle, they would be in a safer place than if they stayed in the vehicle. And it's not the case. You'd be thrown all right, perhaps through the windshield or the door, maybe onto the pavement, against a tree, or into the path of another vehicle, or even into the path of your own vehicle. Now, this next vehicle or this next video that I'm going to show you, this one is rough, folks. I just want to give you a heads up. I want you to pay close. It's going to show twice. It's going to show once in real time and then once in slow motion. And I want you to pay close attention to the driver of this SUV. See the driver? Now it's going to show again in slow motion how many times does this vehicle roll over before he is ejected. About 1.5 times is all that took. So I know that was rough, but the reason I show that is I have yet to see a video that more clearly illustrates just how easily a person can be ejected from a vehicle. So very important that we wear our seat belts, folks. Encourage your family, your friends to wear them. So important to do that. Okay, I'm going to keep moving because there are some things here that I want to talk about. Number one is distracted driving, and we'll probably finish up with this today. So, distracted driving is any non-driving activity a person engages in that has the potential to distract him or her from the primary task of driving and increases the risk of crashing. Okay, there are three types or three categories of distracted driving. Number one is visual. That means your eyes are off the road. You might be looking at a passenger. You might be looking for an address or looking at the scenery outside your vehicle. The second one is manual. Your hands are off the wheel. So you're eating something, you're drinking, you're adjusting your radio or your GPS. The third one is cognitive. And that means that your mind is off the driving task, okay? Texting while driving involves all three types of those distractions. So there's a little bit of science behind this, and I want to explain this. The National Safety Council has compiled numerous research studies and reports by scientists around the world to compare driver performance with handheld and hands-free phones. Very important here. All those studies show that hands-free phones offer no safety benefit when driving because hands-free devices do not eliminate the cognitive distraction. Folks, studies indicate that hands-free cell phone use is like driving with a BAC, blood alcohol content of 0.08, which is legally drunk in the state of Colorado. That may be news to some of you folks, but I'm telling you, the studies are there, and we need to understand that it's not a matter of hands-free versus handheld. It's a matter of what's going on inside our heads because it's that cognitive distraction that is creating the hazard for us. Many people will say, well, I'm a good multitasker. I can do both. And that's a myth. Human brains do not perform multiple tasks at the same time. The brain handles tasks sequentially. It switches between each task. Inattention blindness is a type of cognitive distraction. It's looking without seeing. Distracted drivers are less likely to see visual clues, indicators of what might happen next. It messes with their intuition. Their failure to see exits, off the highway, red lights, yellow lights, stop signs, pedestrians, motorcyclists, bicycle riders, the whole 9 yards. All right, I want to play a video for you here, and then we're going to wrap up after that. So go ahead and take a listen here.
So I just confess that I text and drive. If I get a text, I'll look at my phone. It's definitely texting.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat. I do Snapchat and drive sometimes.
Is that like making Snapchats or watching them?
Making them.
Texting is like my main form of communication.
Boredom, honestly.
And B, well, no, I guess no, it's really just A.
I've only never done it at stoplights. I've always been really good about it.
Passenger has a pretty important role driving now, where they're like, oh, red light, red light.
If someone that you like texts you, you're like, you can't just like let it sit there without just knowing what they said. Because what if something exciting's happening or something happened?
Like every time I do it, I think about it, I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I just keep doing it.
So I'd like to want to introduce you to a friend of ours.
My name is JC. Hi, Alexis.
Hi, Dash. Justin, nice to meet you.
I just really quickly want to have a chat, tell you what happened to me. I was 21 years old, driving home from my college graduation ceremony. Driver on his phone was so distracted. He turned left into the intersection at a red light. Another car, an 18-wheeler, swerved to miss him and hit my family's car. And the resulting collision actually killed both of my parents. I spent 2 months in the hospital fighting for my own life, and then 2 more months in a rehab hospital, learning how to walk again, learning how to speak again, learning how to dress myself and how to feed myself. I live with a partially paralyzed body. I didn't have my daddy to walk me down the aisle when I got married.
having sort of like met JC, because you look at JC and sort of give those same reasons.
Oh, usually I use my phone to change a song on. I try to use it as little as possible, but
I'm not gonna look at my phone ever again. Honestly, if I have been sitting at a red light, I'll like glance down to see if my mom's texting me, but the people's lives that are impacted from something that is so stupid.
I can assure you on my drive home right now, I'm not going to use my phone and drive, and I'm not going to do it when I go to work tomorrow and the next day after that until, it becomes a habit, and that just doesn't happen at all.
I know this is hard. I'm sorry. It's hard for me too, but this is real. The power to really actually make a difference and do something about it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I saw that video here a number of years ago at a conference, and I thought it was so powerful that I felt that was a very good add to this presentation. So, how do we stop distracted driving? I mean, honestly, there's a lot of things that companies are doing. Companies are more and more adopting cell phone policies. There's reputational risk for companies that driving big billboards down the road, they get into wrecks and people see it. Lawsuits, you probably all heard the term, nuclear verdicts and whatnot. But I think what this comes down to is social norms. And, if we think back, once upon a time, it was, somewhat socially acceptable to drink and drive. And obviously that is not the case anymore. Now, does it still happen? Sure. But, I think everyone can agree that it is socially not acceptable to drink and drive. And I think that's where we need to get with the use of cell phones or other electronic devices while we're operating a motor vehicle. It doesn't matter if it's hands-free or handheld, it's that cognitive distraction. And until we take it, and just like JC had said, this is something that we each of us has a responsibility, and it starts with each of us. And this is a conversation that we could talk a lot more about. I know I'm out of time. But that's something I do encourage everyone to consider this and to start looking for ways to not be so distracted on the road. Our cell phones have built-in apps that can prevent text messages from coming through to us when we're connected to our phone, to our cars. I mean, explore some of those. Take it one step at a time, and hopefully we get to a point where we're not using this anymore.